Withdraw the complete pinion housing from the transmission case. Clamp the bevel gear set holder tool in a vise. Insert the spline shaft of the pinion in the tool and unscrew the nut. Remove the pinion. Remove the distance collar. Remove the oil seal. Remove the taper roller bearing from the housing. Distance collar. Remove the two washers. Remove the taper roller bearing from the housing. Check that the pinion teeth are in good condition, not excessively worn and undamaged. If necessary, renew the bevel gear set. Check that the two taper roller bearings are in good condition, that the rollers are undamaged and not excessively worn. Renew if necessary. Check that the clearance washers are not distorted or chipped. Renew if necessary. Check that the seal rings are compact, undamaged, and not excessively worn. Renew if necessary. If you need to renew the bevel pinion, then you must also renew the bevel gear mounted on the transmission case. The pinion and gear in the set must be stamped with the same identification number. Use the specific punch to drive the outer race of the taper roller bearings into the bevel pinion housing. Fit the clearance washer. Fit the oil seal. Use the specific punch to fit the bearing inner race to the pinion. Equip the pinion with the two clearance washers. Use the specific punch to drive the complete pinion into the housing. Fit the O-ring. Fit the distance collar. Insert the spline shaft of the pinion in the special tool and tighten the nut. Unscrew the screws and set the washers aside. Remove the complete cover. Remove the gaskets. Remove the spacer. Remove the circlip from the groove in the hollow shaft. Use the specific punch to drive out the taper roller bearing inner race. Unscrew the screws and set the locking tabs aside. Remove the bevel gear. Withdraw the hollow shaft from the bearing. Remove the seal ring. Use the specific punch to drive the bearing out of the cover. Use the specific puller to remove the taper roller bearing outer race from the transmission case. Remove the seal ring and the washer. Check that the fins of the hollow shaft, subject to the action of the torque dampers, are not damaged. Check that the contact surfaces of the seal ring, the bearing on the cover, the outer race of the bearing on the transmission case, the circlip groove on the hollow shaft are not excessively worn, damaged or pitted. Otherwise, renew the parts. Check that the seal ring on the case is compact and has not suffered a reduction of its elastic properties. Otherwise, renew. Check that the roller bearing on the transmission case shows no signs of out of round or worn rollers. Otherwise, renew the bearing. Check that all the components are in perfect working order and that the mating surfaces of transmission case and cover are not scored or damaged. Use 2 nuts and suitable spacers to temporarily secure the housing, complete with pinion, to the transmission case. Fit the specific tool to the gear. Insert the tool onto the transmission case roller bearing. Check the alignment between the pinion teeth and the gear teeth. If the teeth are not properly aligned, adjust the thickness of the ring interposed between the pinion and the taper roller bearing. You must also check the contact area between the pinion teeth and the gear teeth as follows. Coat the pinion teeth with a specific commercial marker die. Fit the gear hollow shaft assembly, cover and relative spacers and gaskets to the transmission case and temporarily screw down the fixing screws. Equip the gear holder hollow shaft with a universal puller tool having central spacers in such a way as to maintain the gear so that it exerts slight pressure towards the brake disc side. Turn the pinion in the direction of run while braking the gear so that the rotation takes place under load and the contact areas are marked on the pinion tooth surfaces. If the contact is correct, the marking on the pinion teeth should appear as shown. Note that the pinion is viewed from the driving shaft side. If the contact markings are as shown here, the gear is too close to the pinion axis of rotation. Move the gear back by increasing the thickness of the shim. If the contact markings are as shown here, the pinion is too close to the gear axis of rotation. Move the pinion backwards by reducing the thickness of the shim. If the contact markings are as shown here, the pinion is too far from the gear axis of rotation. Move the pinion forwards by increasing the thickness of the shim. If the contact markings are as shown here, the gear is too far from the pinion axis of rotation. Move the gear forwards by reducing the thickness of the shim. Fit the washer on the transmission case. Use the specific punch to fit the seal ring on the transmission case. Fit the washer. Use the specific punch to fit the roller bearing outer race to the transmission case. Use the specific punch to fit the bearing to the cover. Fit the oil seal. Assemble the hollow shaft to the cover. Fit the gear. Insert the square locking tabs and tighten the screws. Fit the washer. Use the specific punch to fit the roller bearing inner race to the hollow shaft. Fit the circlip. Fit the gaskets and spacer to the cover. Tighten the screws complete with square locking tabs and washers. When reassembling the bevel pinion housing to the transmission assembly, take account of the fact that the oil flow channels with holes must be assembled in a vertical line. Observing the channels, one must be facing upwards and the other facing downwards.
With the vehicle engine switched off, connect the Axoni 2000 instrument to the diagnostics connector and the vehicle battery. Switch on the instrument. Screw the unions for connection of the vacuum meter lines to the threaded bores on the intake pipes. Connect the vacuum meter lines to the respective unions. Set Axoni to the Adjustments Setup page. Make sure that the throttle is at the stroke end position. Execute the throttle position self-teach procedure. Set the ignition key to off and leave it in this position for at least 30 seconds. Start the engine. Bring the engine to the prescribed temperature, 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Completely close the two bypass screws on the throttle bodies. Bring the engine to just above idle speed, 2000 to 3000 revs. In this condition, revs higher than idle speed, check on the vacuum gauge that cylinders are balanced. If it is not so, turn the adjuster and balance the vacuum. Now adjust engine idle speed. Bring the engine to the prescribed temperature, 70 to 80 degrees Celsius, 158 to 176 degrees Fahrenheit. Adjust idle speed by means of the bypass screws, 1100 plus or minus 50 revs.